Today's video is not a look back, it's something a little different. What I'm going to try to do is give a full review, critique, and analysis of one of the most hailed games of the last generation, The Last of Us. And in case you couldn't tell, this is not going to be very fun. So without further ado, here we start this. Fantastic. Now, I really had no idea what I was in store for with this one. Despite its many Game of the Year awards, I never really paid much attention to it from pre-release to launch. I knew people were really hyped about it, and for some reason I thought that Ellen Page was the person doing the motion capture and the voice for the little girl. So I mean, I was totally out of the loop. The closest I ever came to taking a whiff of this game was when I briefly watched my stepbrother play the multiplayer mode on the PS3 with a full headset on, so I couldn't even hear a thing. So all I knew about this game was that it was supposed to be incredible, like redefine your life sort of incredible. I mean, the game's so good they re-released a Game of the Year edition for the PS3 and a remastered edition for Sony's latest piece of hardware, the PS4. The version I played was the latter, so assumably the most perfect of the bunch. And I strongly disagree with the popular opinion on this game. So much so, in fact, that I feel it's necessary for me to explain to you why through this video. If you have played the game already and adore it, please listen to what I say with an open mind. And if you haven't, well, it goes without saying, but there's spoilers ahead, so watch out. Now, to clarify, what I'm trying to review here is the video game, The Last of Us. I hope you heard me right. I said video game. I will not be touching on the story very much. But to be fair, and as surprising as it may sound coming from me, it is really good. It's pretty freaking amazing. I'm a really big zombie movie fan, and I would go on record as to say that The Last of Us is my favorite zombie story ever told. The thing about a story, though, is that it's not a video game. A story can be used to write a script for a video game, but also a movie, or even just base a novel on. While, yes, as I discussed in my awful series on storytelling in video games, the fact that The Last of Us is a video game allows it to build a sort of atmosphere that it wouldn't be able to in any other medium. The game is offensively linear, which we're gonna touch on later, not giving it much more of an advantage over, say, a 15-hour film. Anyways, that's all I'm gonna say about the story for now. So, how does The Last of Us play? There are two different kinds of what I'm gonna call modes in the game. Each one of these modes is characterized by different core gameplay, as well as different sets of abilities given to the player. The first mode is exploration. This is standard walking around, no danger, just looking for supplies, following a guide, trying to advance to a new area, or solving a puzzle. In this mode, the player and any of their current partners will either walk or, maximum speed, jog at a leisurely pace. The second mode is combat. Every combat situation in the game, aside from certain scripted ones, begins in sneaking mode, where the player is undetected and can try to kill or slip past the enemy stealthily. When spotted, the enemy will try to engage the player, who can then pick from an arsenal including everything from nail bombs to a flamethrower to defend themselves. The player also has the choice to escape the enemy's sight, re-entering sneaking mode. In easy to hard modes, the player also has a listening ability that allows them to locate enemies through walls. The reason I distinguish between these two modes is that I think it makes more sense to tackle their issues individually. So, let's consider exploration mode. This mode shows off both the best and worst aspects of the game's ability to let the player explore freely. As you know, the majority of the game is spent with either Ellie and or a variety of other partners. When freely exploring an area, the partners will sometimes follow you around with a very natural looking movement or enter simple scripted searching animations. It's important to note that the player is the only one who's able to actually collect items, so the partners are really only there for decoration and serve no technical purpose. Nevertheless, it's great in most instances, providing a sense of immersion, but destructive to the atmosphere in others. No matter how connected I feel to a game world, I am instantly thrown out when I turn around in a dark hallway to see my partner following me on a horse. In some situations though, rather than following the player, the partners will just straight up advance to the next area and wait for you to follow them. Again, extremely ineffective at maintaining the mood. Sure, it's fine for AI to collectively decide to abandon me and wait for me in front of a door in silence, but that's not how human beings, people, react in a zombie apocalypse. What's even worse about the AI partners moving ahead on their own, and more noticeable when Joel is adventuring alone with Ellie, is that it not only makes the character seem like he's being unnaturally rejected, but the player too. When my partner just leaves me and keeps going, it means to me, as a gamer, that despite the fact that there are areas that seem interesting to me and that perhaps I would like to take a look at search, that I would be wrong by doing so, because there's nothing important there. That just sucks. Also, the jumping and landing animations are just sort of weird. So, as I briefly mentioned, there's a lot of collecting going on in The Last of Us. Here's one of our first opportunities to explore a big problem that emerges in various sections of the game. A problem that I'm going to call narrative versus gameplay. It feels like throughout the game that the developers focused a lot more on building certain mechanics or features with the story as the primary motivation, leading to some awkward technical or logical issues. While creating a game whose utter purpose is to tell a story is not wrong in the slightest possible way, what I think I'm trying to do is challenge the idea that The Last of Us deserves the title of video game of the year. So, on the subject of collecting, it's a masterpiece as far as the immersion and storytelling are concerned. Almost every house and building in this game has a fully decorated and detailed interior, reflecting the state of the world from the last time they were inhabited. Notes, voice recorders, personal letters, and other forms of documentation are littered around and can serve to tell their own fleshed out sub-stories. The greatest example is the story of Ish, extending from the ruins of the sewer society based entirely on children all the way to the following town. It's impressive because Ish's story begins on one side of the sewer while Kyle's begins on the other. Ish's story is told progressively, from when he began his fort to when he escapes after the ambush, whereas Kyle's is introduced at the end of his life after you find his body along with the bodies of the children in the classroom, all the way back to his home where we learn how he met and why he decided to join Ish.
Well, that wasn't a good idea, now was it?
Unfortunately, the same level of care and detail was not put into the technical side of collecting. Around the world you can find ammunition for whatever weapons you currently have, as well as 7 materials that can be used to craft one of 6 different items. These materials include binding, alcohol, rags, scissor blades, explosives, and sugar. It should be also noted that there's food, which can regenerate health when collected, and scrap metal, which can be used to upgrade guns. There are interesting relationships between these items. For example, health kits and Molotovs both take the same materials to craft. Similarly, shivs use binding and blades, while nail bombs use blades and explosives. Right away, it feels a little weird that 20 years after an infectious zombie outbreak, there are only 7 things in the whole world that are of interest to anyone, and one of them is scissors. It is nice that all crafting and inventory manipulation takes place live in-game without any way of pausing the action, but this is clearly narratively inspired. Maybe I'm being a little picky. Sure, the crafting system works and it's decent, but when they manage to make the storytelling so beautiful, I get a little bit disappointed when the technical aspects aren't somehow above and beyond my expectations as well. Yes, I realize what I'm trying to do is argue that the game is too good at doing what it's trying to do, but yeah, I can't really defend myself from that. There is one detail of crafting, however, that seems to take gameplay over storytelling, but it's the last one they should have ever picked. The player learns how to craft these new items one by one as the game progresses. Standard video game practice. The problem though is that none of these items seem to be like the kind of things that Joel, a former contractor turned zombie survivalist and criminal, wouldn't have been able to come up with on his own over 20 years. After some thought, I think that the sort of outstanding crafting system that would have satisfied me with this game would be something similar to the inventory system in Metal Gear Solid 3. You see, in that game, the inventory was designed around survival as a key theme, whereas in The Last of Us, the main emphasis seems to be on the crafting, what with the lack of pausing. For example, in Metal Gear Solid, animals could be hunted and other sources of food could be collected and stored for later use, even going as far as to go rotten after being held in storage for too long based on the PlayStation's internal clock. In this game, however, food items can only be consumed on the spot to regenerate health, meaning that if your health is full, you can't pick up any more food, not even to store for later, which doesn't really make sense as far as the plot is concerned. Metal Gear Solid 3 also featured a much more interesting healing menu. Rather than just creating generic health packs, the player could find a variety of medical equipment throughout the area, which they could later use on themselves depending on their injury. And what was really cool was that all injuries were treated differently, and there were also a lot of possible injuries you could get. So for example, to heal a burn, you need ointment followed by a bandage. If you got injured, a part of your health bar would turn red. That red space indicated a section of your health bar which would not regenerate naturally until you treated it properly. Now I should note that while a lot of buildings can be entered, there are a few that can't be. In most cases, they used planks of wood boarded up to signify that a door cannot be opened, but some of the doors in the college stage don't have them, leading me to get pretty frustrated when I would try. I mean, look at this one. This door is even at the bottom of a staircase, making it even more noticeable. These doors should have been boarded up like the rest. By the way, Joel doesn't have a shadow. I will give them credit though. Aside from this, I never noticed at any point in the game that the light from the flashlight was ever pointing in any direction that it wasn't supposed to. And when objects were in front of the light, they would cast shadows on the wall in front of them. Which games like, I don't know, Resident Evil 6 didn't manage to freaking do. How hard is that? Come on. Something else I'd like to touch on quick is, while the details and graphical effects in the environment are astonishing, the same cannot be said about their design. Now, there's nothing wrong with linearity, and I feel like a lot of people improperly punish games for that nowadays. But God, The Last of Us is blatantly linear. There is literally a single path all the way from Boston to Utah with no alternate routes. If you set a Roomba up where Joel starts the game, it would get to the end. Christ, just put Ellie on a vacuum and send her on her way. Just take a look at how obstructively they block some of the paths you're not allowed to take. You can't even walk through shrubbery, which, upon inspection from a different angle, are actually two-dimensional. I mean, here, they walk into this scene from off camera, but when you take a look back, you see this. How did they come from here? Did they just phase through the wall? Another use of exploration mode is during mandatory scripted tour and guide sequences. Towards the beginning of the game, right after the intro, there's a long such segment that's meant to introduce the player to the type of world they're in. The first thing any player is going to want to do when given freedom is to explore. But suddenly we're thrown into this situation where we're supposed to follow this woman. So what do? We break the rules, of course. We stay behind to take a look at some standard post-apocalyptic executions. Even the developers knew we would stick behind, though, as indicated by in-game dialogue.
Alright, people, this isn't a show. Keep moving along.
So when the show ends, we have to do the virtual walk of shame all the way back to our guide, who, by the way, is supposed to be romantically significant to our protagonist, in case you missed it. Minutes in, we see that The Last of Us is able to impair its own narrative and character development with its gameplay. Maybe it's just me, but during my first playthrough of the game, the character with the least significance to me was Tess. I mean, I actually had to look up her name just now, and it all stemmed from this single introductory sequence. Immediately, I associated Tess with broken mechanics, awkward storytelling, and I lost touch with her, which is a major shame because she's the only character Joel felt truly comfortable with, and the main reason Joel accepts his mission to transport Ellie to the Fireflies. Even more disappointing is that this could have easily been fixed. As the developers clearly anticipated the player's decision to stay and watch the execution, they could have changed the guide sequence so that, if the player decides to stay, Tess would briefly turn back to watch it with them, possibly making a small remark of some sort. I think a problem with The Last of Us is that it focuses way too much on dialogue-based interactions with characters, but not enough on subtle physical interactions, like waiting by a player while they watch a scripted event. Also, in some guided sequence where the player movement speed is limited to a slow walk, crouching is still possible, which may make the player able to move faster. If things like running are suppressed, so too should be things like aiming or crouching. Some of these exploration sections feature brief puzzles, though it doesn't really seem fair to call them that. They all either involve moving planks of wood or ladders to reach places, moving large wheeled objects like dumpsters around to either clear an obstructed area or climb higher, and finally, pallet puzzles.
I need you to...
I know. Step on the fucking pallet.
These are by far the worst, and I don't think it would have been such a big deal if there was only one such instance. But correct me if I'm wrong, there are 4. These water puzzles, aside from not really making any physical sense, are tedious, unattractive, and odd. Okay, I get it, Ellie can't swim, but does the distance I need to take her really need to be this long? Do I learn anything by doing this? It's barely even a puzzle. All I have to do when I reach a submerged area is search for a pallet, bring it to Ellie, and then bring her to wherever I need to go. I don't feel like any of these puzzles really help, and the fact that none of them treat the partner system as anything other than a burden is a little sad. For instance, take this scene. Upon reaching this part where I had to get a ladder to the top of the building, I was almost certain that I would have to do it by lifting it up from the bottom and handing it to Ellie, who would be standing on top. Unfortunately, these tasks are all completed alone. It disappointed me to discover that the true solution was to place it against the edge, climb up the building, and pick it up myself. It may shock you to hear this, but aside from specific scripted, semi-cinematic sequence, this game in which 2 people travel across the post-apocalyptic United States together is void of teamwork. Now, there are a few other things that occur throughout the game that I'm not really sure if I can call puzzles, but I feel like that's what they're supposed to be. The problem with these things is that they recur throughout the whole game. One of these situations is finding the combinations for safes. You see, throughout the world you'll find safes, but they're locked and the game tells you have to find a combination for it. And somewhere in the area there's a note with the combination written on it. So once you find that note, you can open the safe and get yourself a little knick-knack. Great, the first time, that's pretty clever. When it happens 3 times in different areas of the game, it's kinda sad. The other one is generators. You see, a lot of the sections involve opening doors that need to be powered, so you have to find a generator and either bring it to it or just start up the thing, which can serve to make combat somewhat more interesting, because activating the generator creates noise, but I mean, I'm gonna kill all these guys anyways. Now, combat mode. This is where a lot of my gripes are. Considering the lack of any significant gameplay in the exploration mode, the combat is where the game should shine, right? I mean, it didn't win over 200 Script of the Year awards, it won over 200 Game of the Year awards. Unfortunately, the combat is extremely lackluster, repetitive, and bad. As explained earlier, every single combat situation begins with a stealth sequence. The first major problem is that the transition from casual exploration mode to hardcore combat is so quick that if you blink, you'll miss it. You see, given the game's strictly linear nature, enemies are not rendered until they need to be. Say once you enter a building or cross a certain invisible trigger. This is provable by the player's listening ability. Once enemies have been drawn into the game, there's always some sort of audible indication made to the player, either a character stating their presence or the whispering of human enemies. On top of that, any partners you currently have will suddenly crouch and begin stealthing around. There was one instance during my first playthrough in the section with Henry and Sam where I was leisurely exploring when suddenly all of my friends suddenly crouched down in synchronous. I remember distinctly thinking to myself, wow, well I guess there's enemies. That's pretty bad. As a very cautious player, I used the listening as frequently as possible to be able to anticipate threats, because I kept believing that at some point I would encounter a stray enemy while in exploration mode. I mean, that's the sort of thing I would do if the situation were real. This, however, was pointless, because no enemies existed for me to anticipate unless I was in a combat situation. As a gamer, this was a substantial factor in my disconnection from the game. There is not a single moment at which the player has to navigate around a single solo zombie. They always come in packs, and they always come in combat situations. As far as the actual fighting goes, there's not much to say about it. It's a standard third-person shooter with a variety of weapons to choose from. Partners will sometimes assist you, including Ellie when she's allowed to be armed. Just as any other survival horror game with a partner system that you've played before, friends will occasionally get caught wrestling zombies and require your help to break free. Which is fine, but the favor is never returned. When the player gets caught by some types of zombies, it's an instant death, complete with custom animation. There is no hope for your partners to help you. The only way to survive one of these attacks is to upgrade your own character to counter them with a shiv, an ability that I never opted for. Shivs are difficult to craft, and some special doors require them to become unlocked. To me, being caught meant that I made a mistake that I would learn from when trying again. Using an ability like this just seemed like a waste, as there's no penalty for dying. From my perspective, saving myself and depleting my shiv count had more of a negative impact than a death. There is an interesting melee system. While not really making the game very scary, oh, by the way, did I mention that this game isn't really scary at all? Not that I feel that it was actually going for that anyways. The melees do make combat more enjoyable. Pressing square allows Joel to unleash a flurry of punches and occasionally grapple the enemy and execute finishers depending on the environment. There are various melee weapons around the world that can be collected and serve as a powerful substitute to fists. These weapons deteriorate with use, but can also be upgraded with blades to offer a limited number of one-hit kills. It's important to note that some zombie types are immune to melee attacks without weapons, and upon killing some human enemies, their melee weapons can be picked up, but not their ammo all the time for some reason. Sneaking is obviously much preferred over combat, as it makes use of far less equipment and is actually the promoted tactic of The Last of Us. However, it brings to light some of the game's most dreadful broken features. First things first, the partner system doesn't actually exist. Just as these fellow adventurers serve no purpose in exploration mode, their presence has no impact while sneaking, and the game makes no attempt to try to conceal this. So what does this mean? Well, primarily that partners cannot be spotted by enemies. Say you're hiding behind one side of a box-shaped object while your partner lies along the other edge. When the enemy begins to sweep the area, if they happen to pass by your partner, nothing will happen. This is frankly disgusting. I mean, given its heightened level of popularity, the situation I keep imagining is that a large proportion of non-gamers have been drawn in by this title. These sorts of people don't necessarily understand the mechanics behind games, and I imagine that watching such a scenario unfold would be nothing but confusing to them. I mean, the game directs you to take cover from searching enemies, but for some reasons your partners don't have to follow the same rules. I really don't think I have to explain why this is bad. It just really is. Now, considering the experience of someone who's familiar with games, this fact that partners don't matter while sneaking, again, serves to isolate the player. Sure, I have all of these friends around me, but I'm the only one that actually matters. The enemies aren't after them, they're only after me. That's what a yawn sounds like from a beautiful man. Oh my god. Freaking weird. Now, remember how I mentioned that the walking animations for the partners were pretty natural looking? Well, it seems like they tried to do something similar with team sneaking. For example, by trying to get your teammates to occupy their own hiding space when possible. Because, you know, the game allows for this sort of thing to happen otherwise. This unfortunately worsened, at least through my experience, the previously discussed issue. Sometimes while I was just laying low and planning my next move, my partners would begin to adjust themselves, sometimes walking out in the open and coming comically close to enemies I was trying to sneak up on, who obviously couldn't be bothered enough to care as my allies don't even exist to them. Now, please watch this unedited piece of gameplay and imagine playing this yourself. What would you be thinking?
He's over here!
On my first playthrough, which, yeah, okay, I might as well mention I didn't record. I never record my first playthroughs. But I'll try my best to recreate the events of. I watched as Henry, just after telling me he'd follow my lead,
Hey, I'll follow your lead.
Alright.
proceeded to walk all the way up to 2 guards and just stand between them. Mid-conversation, no consequence.
You think they're still in the city?
Yeah, they're still around.
Second, enemies are pretty bad both in terms of how they're designed and how they're implemented. Let's start with zombies. There are 4 kinds of zombies in the game, although I would argue that there are only 3 distinct kinds. The reason is that 2 types, runners, the standard zombie, and stalkers, a slightly different type of standard zombie, both have more or less the same attributes. The difference being that runners tend to mope around or just stand in place, only running when a sound is made or when the player is detected, whereas stalkers are constantly sprinting around searching for you, calling the rest of the pack when they spot you. All in all, stalkers are just runners who run. That sounds weird. The other thing is that stalkers are only present in 2 sections of the game and aren't really introduced properly like each other type is. So I'm not really sure if they merit their own classification. The other 2 zombie types are drastically different though. Clickers are zombies who have survived for quite a while and showcase prolonged effects of the infection. They're blind and navigate by sound, so the player needs to be careful around these guys. Finally, there are bloaters, the oldest zombies. As you can imagine, there aren't very many of them. In fact, there are only 7 throughout the whole game, and only for 2 of them is it mandatory to fight and not just sneak past. Bloaters are also blind, but they pack quite a punch and are the only enemy type with a projectile attack. They're also, in my opinion, the only enemy type I would praise the development team for. Unlike the 2 other types, there is an offensive strategy to killing these guys. First, you need to destroy their mushroom armor to weaken them, then go in for the kill. The best way to go about this is by lighting them on fire by some means, burning off their protective coating and weakening them substantially. So, 3 types of zombies that all offer some sort of different method of engagement. What's wrong with that? Well, for over half the game, the player fights clickers. That's right, a special zombie type, not a standard one, is the most common enemy in the game. This, I assume, is yet another result of the developers taking narrative more seriously than gameplay. It makes sense that the majority of infected zombies are old, especially considering that for the last 2 decades, human population has been decreasing, and assumably infection rate along with it. But you know what isn't fun? Crawling around at a snail's pace, sneaking up on blind zombies. Sometimes they throw a couple of standard zombies alone in a dark room, so that if the clicker spots you, the runners will also come running too, making you feel overwhelmed. But if you're trying to play using stealth, all it means is that you have to choke out the normal zombies because 1, you can choke zombies safely, and 2, because somehow this is silent to clickers. But moving the joystick more than a millimeter off center is too loud. Christ, these things have worse selective hearing than me. You can also throw bottles and bricks around to draw their attention elsewhere, and let me just talk about this for a minute. These bottles and bricks, holy crap, there are so many of them. I kept thinking there was a technical reason for it, like maybe the level designers designed each section to be solvable using all of these, but that's not the case. I can't even express to you the overwhelming amount of these items in the game. God, and I'm losing my voice. I'm turning into a zombie. Again, story before gameplay. It makes sense that bottles and bricks be spread across such a rubble-filled world. But you know what sucks? When I'm walking around being constantly notified of every single empty beer bottle or brick I pass by. I don't care about them. And you know what sucks even more? The fact that they shine! Just like other collectible and drastically more important objects. Like bottles of alcohol or packs of ammo. It's just ridiculous. My goodness. I should have brought a water bottle. Now, clickers can't be choked. The only way to silently kill them in close quarters is by using a shiv, which, as I explained, is not the sort of item you like to use unnecessarily. Fortunately, melee weapons such as pipes, or, yeah, even bricks, can also be used to kill these guys. And if you're far enough from any other zombies, you can occasionally manage to knock them out without drawing to yourself any unwanted attention. That is, only if none of your partners do anything stupid. You see, shanking an enemy silently keeps your partners in sneaking mode. But as soon as you pull out any other kind of weapon, they think your intention has become offense. So say I've managed to get one guy alone and decide to kill him stealthily with some non-stealth object. My partner might begin shooting randomly, drawing attention to me and ruining my strategy. The developers also failed to fix certain exploits. For example, enemies can't enter cramped areas where crouching is necessary. In this section of the museum stage, I can hide under this rubble and safely fire at my enemies one at a time. Though sometimes weird stuff happens that I think is them trying to prevent me from being able to do that, but is just really bad looking. I have like saliva all in my mouth. I'm just talking so much that it's drying and it's like cement in my mouth and it like hurts to move. I feel like, what's that movie where like this monster comes out of the rubble like he's like breaking rocks all over his body or I don't know what, because he's like made of rock. I don't know. I think there's something like that. I should mention that later in the game, the player can acquire a bow that can also take out enemies silently, but is only effective if you're unnoticed. Unfortunately, spare arrows are rare, but sometimes they can be picked off bodies, which is a nice touch. The problem is that if you miss, it has the same attention-drawing properties as throwing a bottle or brick. So in a situation like this where there are two idle zombies standing next to each other, the safest thing to do, yet most unrealistic, is not to use the bow, but to go up to each one by one and choke them. Next, let's talk about human enemies. Soldiers, militia members, and hunters are all much more varied than the zombies. Humans can wield virtually any item you have, aside from some special ones. As always, an encounter usually begins with the player being unnoticed. It's an extremely repetitive situation. You walk through a trigger, a bunch of guys spawn, you get to listen to them speak for a while. One of them always mentions how they have to search the area now for some reason or another, and that's it. Obviously, the main difference between fighting humans and fighting zombies is that humans will take you on much more defensively when you get spotted. Also, rather than just returning to normal patrol when you escape their gaze, they'll proceed much more cautiously. A major problem is their field of view. It seems like their vision is relative to their chest rather than their heads. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if their head was just always pointing straight forward, but it's not. In fact, they move them around naturally. This causes a problem in a situation like this, where the player can sneak up on an enemy perpendicularly, which just never feels fair. Even worse, when a human finds a dead body of their friends, they bend over them and look over their shoulders. But since their vision isn't related to their heads, they don't actually see you if you're standing right next to them. What I do like is that the AI will actually go out of their way to stay away from you when they know they're in trouble. For example, in an intense standoff, they might just stay behind cover and wait for you to make the next move. They have a great sense of self-preservation, as they should, being as they're survivors first and foremost, which, dare I say it, is a pretty good example of the story positively constructing the gameplay situation. Altogether, fights with humans are a lot more interesting than those against zombies, even in a few special ones. One of my favorites was the part where there's a sniper perched in a house at the end of a street, and you have to navigate through houses and other enemies to get to him. All the while he's screaming things at you. I felt like this fight was really personal. It just really struck a nerve with me, especially considering that this was right after the depressing sewer stage. For a while, I even considered whether or not this sniper could be Ish himself, being that he was the most vocal enemy I'd faced so far. Maybe the developers even purposefully orchestrated this thought process into me, and if so, I applaud them. But in the end, there's no way of knowing. Despite it being one of my favorite parts in the game, the sniper scene actually does contain a major problem. You see, the sniper doesn't actually exist. If you manage to get close enough to the perch, you'll notice that the only thing rendered is a stationary sniper rifle, and that it can shoot in any which direction it wants. Which, yeah, doesn't really help for immersion's sake. And the only way to actually kill the sniper is to enter the building and climb up to that level where you're treated to this scripted sequence. And normally I would not consider this a problem because developers do have to do a lot of cheating to make sure their games are good. However, at the beginning of this sequence, Joel says this one major line.
I'm gonna go around and see if I can't get the angle on him.
Which implies that he plans on shooting him, which is basically a directive given to the player. You, as a player, are supposed to get yourself close enough to this guy to shoot him out, but you can't because he doesn't exist. Something that begins to present itself as a problem as the game goes on is just the sheer number of human kills that the player racks up. Joel just gruesomely slaughters these people one after the other like it's his job. There's so much killing going on that it becomes inignorable by the narrative, getting one character, a cannibal no doubt, to refer to Joel as a crazy man.
He said that the others had been slaughtered by a crazy man.
Even Ellie doesn't hesitate to viciously murder a whole camp of survivors. The problem is that something like this can't be fixed very easily. While sneaking is always recommended, it's not always sufficient to just sneak past them and let them live. If you pass a dozen guys unnoticed and accidentally get spotted by the last guy, everyone comes after you, and you're toast. It's for this reason that it's much preferable to slowly kill enemies while constantly moving forward. What's odd too is that upon entering the next area, enemies can sometimes be overheard speaking about this psychopath who supposedly killed all the men in the previous area. How could they know? None of them have phones or anything, but it does go to show that developers planned for the player to kill all the enemies. The only possible solution I could imagine would be to reduce the number of human enemies while increasing their tactical abilities, maintaining the same tenseness during fights. Now that I've explained to you the different enemy types, there may be a question that you've been gearing up to ask me, and if so, I'm proud of you. You must have seen where I was going with this. LambHoot, you might say, because that's totally a thing people call me. You know, they don't call me things that hurt my feelings, like Mexican John. Try me, come, you know what? Does this look like Mexico to you? Come on! LambHoot, you haven't mentioned a single situation in which the player has to face both humans and zombies at the same time. Certainly such a case must exist in a big budget game of the year, to which I would reply, no. There is not a single situation in the 15-hour campaign of The Last of Us that forces the player to take on both the infected and humans simultaneously. And what upsets me the most is that it seems like the game, aware of this, tries to cover it up. Let me explain. Oh my god. My camera's a little hot. It's okay. I'm hot too. Why do I always do that? First and foremost, the type of enemy being fought alternates strictly, meaning that if the last combat situation was a firefight with humans, the next one will be against zombies and vice versa. I tried my best to find an exception to that rule, but one just does not exist. It's pretty awful and gives the game a really synthetic feeling. Throughout my playthrough, I kept reminding myself of the last fight I had in order to flawlessly predict the enemies in my next one. Fight zombies, explore, fight humans, explore, fight zombies, explore, fight humans. I mean, come on! This terrible predictability is enough alone for me to pass judgment on this game. This is unacceptable and disappointing. The only reason I can imagine this was done was to ensure an even distribution of both enemy types, which I can only assume was meant to prevent the players from feeling as though one was more of a threat than another, which obviously comes from the plot. Aside from the fact that zombies and humans are so iteratively fenced off from each other, the game offers little to no narrative reason for it. Neither do any of the characters ever make any remarks about it. In a couple of cases, the game justifies the presence of zombies in an oddly isolated area by stating that some survivors would actually use them as a sort of security system against human bandits. However, the player knows that the true reason they're here is because the last things the developer threw at them were humans. To anyone who's already noticed the constant switching, the fact that they even take the time to mention something like this is just plain disheartening. It's hard to explain to someone just how much this makes the game fall short. So, let me show you this scene. So this takes place after you kill the sniper we discussed earlier. The player is briefly forced to man the sniper rifle themselves now and provide cover for their partners as they try to make their way to the end of the street. The sequence begins by having you shoot at humans, specifically the bandits you've been facing off against the whole time. After a while, a jeep shows up along with more bandits. Once all of the enemies have been finished off and after the briefest moment of silence, a horde of zombies shows up. This, right here, is the greatest example of how mediocre, artificial, and immersion killing the absolute distinction between the two enemy types in combat situations can make the game feel. If, say, the zombies appeared slightly earlier and scriptedly killed a few of the bandits just for show, the scene would have felt significantly less poor. Possibly more disappointing is that there's evidence that the developers actually knew that this was an issue. And this evidence comes in the form of a DLC mission. The expansion to The Last of Us, Left Behind, includes a couple of combat segments towards its end that feature both zombies and humans, showing just how much this single change to fighting can improve both quality of gameplay and even immersion. These were the only fights in my entire experience with The Last of Us that made me feel as though the inclusion of bricks and bottles were justified, excited me, and altogether made me consider any other strategy than just sneaking and shooting. I do have to say, however, that while I really enjoyed them, I wish it wasn't always made so obvious what I had to do. So for example, here after crawling through the ducts, you stumble upon these clickers and humans just standing around, no one moving. Bottles. I wonder what I'm supposed to do. I much prefer the last big fight though, which starts as a standard fight against humans, but where zombies are introduced halfway through. This is what this game should have been. We need more of this. Okay, thank you! I mean, look, maybe this wouldn't have been such a big deal if, one, the story, or rather the way the story is presented, was so good, and two, the fact that The Last of Us kind of pulls every major plot point you can imagine in a zombie story. It's got everything. The immune person, families forced to kill each other, even a character who gets bitten and decides to sacrifice her life to defend her friends. You know what? Hold up. Looking back at it, this scene is pretty freaking amazing. So after Tess reveals that she got bitten, she stays back to fight off the soldiers while Joel and Ellie escape, because her life's over anyways, right? So once you go back into gameplay, after a brief pause, you hear a few muffled gunshots, and that's it. Neither character reacts. Then as you sneak out of the building, you see Tess's body. Like, holy crap! That's a dramatic death done right. Most impressively, that's the sort of thing that could have only been done in a video game. Going through this game and making this review, that scene just went right over my head for some reason. I mean, I'll be honest, this is actually the last thing I wrote about in my script before printing. So for as awesome as it just wasn't memorable to me for some reason. Sorry to backtrack, but I blame this again on the fact that Tess was never properly introduced as she should have been. It seems to me like the entire first section of the game featuring her is really just the point at which the player is still getting used to all of the crappy AI and combat stuff. The plot was still really foggy back then, so none of it really left an impression on me. Also, the fact that Tess is the only one that Joel knows as soon as the game skips 20 years prevents you from really being able to care about her. Now, I said I wouldn't touch into the story, but this is one thing I'm gonna say. I think that the relationship between Tess and Joel, and even Ellie in between them, would have been much stronger if Tess was actually Joel's wife from before the infection, making it more clear to the players what kind of relationship these two characters have, and also making it mean a lot more when Tess tells Joel to take Ellie on this crazy trip. I don't know, I just think personally that would have really made more sense, but I'm clearly not a writer. I'm just a crappy person, so I see the worst in games and people. Especially myself, I'm so fucking ugly. By the way, there seems to be something up with the physics. Yeah, sure, I understand that nowadays it's sort of a cop-out not to make the environment semi-interactable. But let's think about that for a second. They put in all the nice collisions and everything to make it look more realistic, right? Well, let me ask you this. Does this look realistic to you? No! Not at all! Check this out, I managed to pull this rocking chair along with me for a while. I even managed to get it into a cutscene, and finally into the next combat area, where, surprise, nobody reacted to it. Hey look, I'm a pothead. So like I said, I really did enjoy this game. And here are a few very technical things that I really enjoyed. I really liked that in the sections with knee-high water, you couldn't craft or access your backpack. Because when the characters access their backpacks, they kneel down on the ground with it, making the situation a little bit more tense. Because now on top of having low visibility and being, you know, submerged in water, you also can't switch out your weapons or create new tools. Another nice thing, and if you watched my Freddy Fish video that you know I'm already a sucker for, is custom dialogue depending on the situation. That's very subtle, but it's very powerful. For example, right after meeting Henry and Sam, everybody has a little conversation as you go down the staircase. At one point, Henry asks if Ellie is Joel's daughter. Now, if you just walked at a normal pace, Ellie will actually respond, followed by Joel.
It's just you and your daughter?
We're not related. We're more like,
I promised someone I'd look after her.
Yeah. I can appreciate that.
However, if you manage to move ahead and made it so that Ellie isn't in earshot of you, the same conversation will take place, but exclusively between Joel and Henry.
It's just you and your daughter?
I promised someone I'd look after her.
Yeah. I can appreciate that.
I like that sort of thing. At this point, I've mostly covered all the technical issues I wanted to discuss. So I'll move on to another more critical aspect of the game. If you asked someone what The Last of Us was about without mentioning zombies, they would likely answer that it's about the relationship between two characters, Joel and Ellie. The plot is hailed for its character development, among other things. So yes, narratively, the relationship between them is expressed beyond satisfactionally.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to want to be a singer.
shut up.
Oh, serious?
Sing something.
No.
Come on, I won't laugh.
I don't think so.
Joel, please.
However, the ways in which it is shown through gameplay, the single characteristic of video games that differentiate them from any other form of art, is disappointingly unimpressive. The sole example of any sort of technical expression of the relationship between Joel and Ellie through gameplay is this hiding animation. When hiding, characters will crouch under walls and whatever. When Joel and Ellie take cover close to each other, Joel sort of embraces Ellie. This simple animation is important because it's something special that only these two characters have together. As you play the game and see this animation take place, it reminds you of the special relationship that they have. It's a very nice touch. This shows how narrative and gameplay are able to work together to express an idea. Aside from this, what do we have? Well, sometimes Ellie will walk up to Joel, say something,
Hey, you got a second?
and then display a button prompt over her head so that the player can continue the conversation. While this tries to pass off as gameplay or interactivity, it just isn't. Every player who ever plays this game receives the same button prompt. And I mean, it's presented as being optional, but is it really? If you don't press it, it dampens your experience of the narrative. Fact is, these are mandatory parts of the plot and could have easily been replaced by cinematics. There's the puzzles that I described earlier that require their cooperation, but these never really seem to say anything about how they feel about each other. They're just raw, crappy puzzles. There's a scene after the hotel where Joel finally trusts Ellie to use a gun and cover him, which could have helped strengthen their relationship in the eyes of the player during gameplay if it was actually possible to tell whether or not she was shooting anyone. I mean, I can't tell. I think it would have also helped if she had been yelling and taunting the enemies from her little bunker. Throughout the entirety of the game, she's very vocal and aggressive.
Tell them that Ellie is the little girl. I broke your fucking finger!
So looking back at this scene, it's hard to understand why they decided to make her silent. Of course, there's also the part in the college where Joel gets impaled and Ellie guides him to safety. While this is arguably one of the most important moments in their relationship, it's entirely unnecessary to let the player keep control during it. At least just to press forward on the joystick. Wow, I get to stumble around. That's fun. Again, in its current state, this could have been replaced with a cinematic. Here, something like the Metal Gear Solid 4 crawling scene comes to mind. In a scene like this where a character is struggling to stay up, I would argue that button mashing can really help to immerse the player and make them feel connected to the events happening on screen, rather than pressing forward and wondering if the trips and falls are scripted or if I'm doing something wrong. One of my favorite parts of the game was the chapter that took place right after this. This one started with Ellie hunting a deer, which was a nice calm way to pick up after the high intensity impalement scene, and focused on how she had been caring for Joel as he healed. In my opinion, this chapter had the most pure, storytelling embedded gameplay. First, being able to play as Ellie was a major change aesthetically, but brought little technical change, showing that Ellie is a very strong character and able to fend for herself. The fact that Ellie's inventory could be searched through to see what kinds of secrets and knickknacks she was carrying caught me off guard in a good way. In this single section, we see her take on more action than Joel does throughout a lot of the game, from fighting off a horde of zombies to escaping enemies on horseback. Even when Joel wakes up later and the perspective switches between the two of them, Ellie is shown to be much more resourceful than him. I really wish there were more combat sections featuring Ellie as the main playable character. Finally, another simple feature that made quite an impact on me and was exclusive to combat was the remarks made by Ellie. Sometimes when the player gets a kill, Ellie will chime in, either encouraging the player or showing a little bit of disgust.
Holy shit, Joel!
Either way, the fact that she reacts to the events going on in the game makes her seem a little bit more real. She can also serve to warn Joel of the direction of an approaching enemy when they're off screen, which is really cool. Despite all of the issues and errors I just discussed, I really did enjoy the game. At points, especially in the graveyard scene, I kept getting these vibes of Resident Evil 4 inspiration, which was really nice. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is probably one of my favorite games of all time, maybe even one of the greatest in general, so that was good. Now in RE4, the escort system was a lot different. I mean, Ashley didn't have any abilities, but the relationship between her and Leon was still apparent. Their version of the Joel and Ellie sneaking hug thing was the fact that Ashley was always visibly hiding behind Leon when the player would enter aiming mode, meaning that she was constantly in frame in a thoughtful way. I feel as though Ellie, as an AI partner, falls somewhere between Ashley and Sheva from Resident Evil 5. She's there to assist you and help you out sometimes, but she doesn't get in your way. She doesn't pick up items, and she can't even be spotted by the enemy. This obviously goes for all partners, by the way. Now clearly, especially in regards to being spotted, this is sort of a good thing. She doesn't ruin the solo experience of the player in any way, but here's my problem with that. I've been sort of presenting each problem in the video so far in preparation for what you're about to hear next. This game is called The Last of Us, but it feels a lot more like The Last of Me. As I touched on earlier, I, the player, am the only one who actually matters in this world. Everything in this game makes me feel completely isolated. Like this isn't even a game. Like it's rather some clever play that a bunch of characters and enemies are causing me to believe is real. I'm the only one that can be spotted. I'm the only one that can search for items. I'm the only one that can craft items. I'm the only one who has to manage a limited amount of ammunition. I'm the only one who doesn't have sort of non-deteriorating melee weapon. I'm the only one who can perform stealth kills. I'm the only one who stays behind to look at cool things. I'm the only one who decides whether or not to continue a conversation with someone. And upgrading my own personal ability is the only way to rescue myself from being grappled by an enemy. So yeah, maybe Ellie doesn't get in the way. Maybe she doesn't interfere with my single player experience. But maybe she should. Maybe she should be a much more active participant in this world. I wouldn't really appreciate it, but I think I would hate it a lot less if Ellie could actually be spotted by enemies. Or hey, maybe we could work together to expand our inventory. I mean, I can only carry 3 of each material and item, so why don't I ask Ellie to carry around a few extra health packs? The partner system should have been the key feature gameplay-wise in The Last of Us, but unfortunately, it isn't. Rather, it's completely brushed aside and made irrelevant for the supposed convenience of the player. And it's this unequal treatment between the relationship of Joel and Ellie narrative-wise and gameplay-wise that ultimately disappoints me with this game of the year. Thank you for watching.
Listen. You hear that? Let's get out of here.
Welcome to the end screen. Welcome to the end screen. So once again, I join you. I recorded all this dialogue and I wrote the script before I even recorded the footage for the game, so that's gonna be interesting. I gotta get this done quick because I think people are gonna get home soon, and I don't want to be filming when they're here. So I didn't have a physical copy of the game. All I have is this weird voucher thing. It works, I guess. So I'm gonna put that on the stack, and maybe I'll like stick it out just a little bit so we can always see it. Can you see it there? I can't tell if you can see it there. So just remember The Last of Us. Also, never forget Gex. Never forget Gex. If ever I become popular enough to have like t-shirts made for myself, I think one of them would be me like standing like this, like with my arms out, like, and it would be like Gex's dead body. Like, you know when Gex dies and he has the flower over his head like that with the X's on his eyes, and like me holding him, like, and Gex is just dead, and I'm like, no, my son, or something like that, like something like really like, I want it to make it look like a really religious sort of, and then it'll just say never forget Gex, and that's just perfect. But that'll never happen. So I better put this script, holy jeez. This is the longest script I've ever written. I think it's about 12 pages. I'm not going to go counting right now. I'm not going to put it under the stack of scripts yet because I highlighted a bunch of stuff that I needed to remember for when I record gameplay, because I have a problem with that. I mentioned something in the script and then I forget to record gameplay of it because I'm an idiot. So I kind of need this for later, but I'll put it back next time. Sorry if it got a little crazy. I started writing that thing during exams. My last exam was literally yesterday at 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock or till 10 o'clock at night, whatever. I finished early though. But yeah, during like mid-exam, like whenever because I would just, like, I can't study now. Like, I'm done. I've been studying for 4 hours. I need to stop. And then instead of chilling or watching TV or goofing around, one, I played The Last of Us and I decided I was going to make a video about it. And two, I started writing my script right away. I started writing the script as soon as I finished the game. So yeah, this was a fun one. Now, some of you guys have talked to me and reached out to me and asked me what I'm trying to do next. And I did mention that I have a pretty big project on the way. This was not that. That one is another game video, but it's going to take a while. You'll understand when it comes out, but trust me, I think you'll like it. It's something that, as far as I can tell, no one's ever done, and I'm trying to do it very professionally, so we'll see how it goes. So I guess thank you for watching. You know what, I should mention, because I don't get any traffic to my videos, which, you know, whatever, because I've never really tried. My god. I really lost my voice. But yeah, I've never said it because I always thought it sounded cheesy, but give a thumb and a subscribe and a hello, do all that stuff, please, thank you. And if you don't mind, take it and post it on your face, but I don't know, do whatever you want. Just this one is pretty big. Thank you for watching. This end screen is so disappointing. It's not like 5 minutes long. Nah, whatever. Anyways, bye. Oh wait, I have to make a Last of Us joke. Okay, I have jokes I want to make, but I don't know if I want to make them because I don't know if I'm going to use them in the intro or outro. So I can't really use them yet. Ugh. Bye-bye! What did she say in that? I was going to make that joke. Bye-bye! What did she say? Dudes? Or nudes? What did she say? You know the line where she takes the thing and she throws it out the window? I don't know what she says. I was going to make that joke. So just assume I made that joke properly and have a good laugh. Pat yourself on the back and say, hello! Goodbye! How do I turn it off? Oh. Thank you for watching. I love you.